UFC Fight Night, Holloway versus the Korean Zombie. The UFC heads to Singapore this weekend for a big card. We got 13 fights lined up, a lot of super intriguing fights with a lot of storylines between them. I will be going over each of the fights today. I'm going to break down them, give you all my predictions and picks for each of the fights. These are taking place in Singapore, so we're going to be waking up early where I'm at to watch them, but that's the life we live. So without further ado, let's get right into it. We have Choi taking on Jarno Errens in the featherweight division. Choi is the minus 150 favorite here, with Errens being plus 125. Both of these guys have had their struggles in the UFC. Errens is 0-1, and Choi is on a three-fight losing streak, losing to Acosta-Cortes, Chisano, and Josh Kulabau. Choi is a guy who I've actually followed quite a bit. A good friend of mine is actually pen pals with him, and they send each other little cute messages all the time. So I have been keeping an eye on this guy for a little bit now through his ups and downs. Choi's a guy, he's super aggressive. He's a really exciting fighter. He manages to rock his opponent and get rocked in basically all of his fights. He's not going in there to win on points. He's going in there to get a finish. He's fighting a guy in Errens who isn't much of a KO threat himself. He only has 3 KOs in 18 pro fights. I think that's going to help Choi's case a lot. Choi's going to be really motivated in this one to get a win, and a decisive win, because if you lose 4 in a row, his UFC career is going to be in serious jeopardy. So I think Choi wins this one by decision. I don't know if he's able to find a finish in this one, but I think he'll end up rocking Errens a few times. Errens is just a guy who's never really been knocked out. Next up is a fight between Liang Na and Aldrich. Na is the plus 400 underdog in here. In this one, Aldrich being a minus 550 favorite. Liang Na, she's been in the UFC for 2 fights, gotten KO'd in both of them. I think that's explains the line here. I'm just going to go ahead and trust the betting line here. Aldrich has a big experience advantage in the UFC. She's got a bunch of fights under her belt. She's never gotten a KO finish of her own in the UFC, so I think she gets a decision win in this one versus Liang Na. Next up is a welterweight fight between Yusaku Kinoshita, and he will be taking on Billy Goff. Kinoshita is the slight favorite in this one. He is 1-1 in the UFC, with Billy Goff being 1-0. Kinoshita had a big debut KO win in the Contender Series. He was looking like a serious problem, showed a lot of power in this one. But he is the youngest welterweight on the roster, I believe. And it showed in his next fight against Adam Fugit, where he got pretty much mauled, showed serious weaknesses in the grappling department, and ended up getting finished because he just literally could not get Fugit off of his back. Goff, on the other hand, he's got good hands, got a KO in his Dana White Contender Series debut, and I'm guessing he's got better grappling, just because you're not going to see much worse grappling than we saw out of Kinoshita in his last fight. I'm liking Goff by KO in this one, more just him finding a way to get on top of Kinoshita, and then Kinoshita just not being able to get up. I think this Billy Goff really is only a couple years older than Kinoshita, but it really shows. I think that little experience advantage he's going to have is going to help him out a lot in this one. So Goff by KO is the pick. Next up, we have I believe it is a welterweight fight, another one between Rolando Bedoya and Kenan. Bedoya lost his UFC debut, but he's still a major favorite in this one, coming in at minus 270. And that's because he got absolutely robbed in his loss to Chaos Williams. Everyone who watched that with a brain knows that Bedoya clearly outstruck him the entire fight. Never really even took that many shots. I mean, he just showed way better boxing. He was clearly the far superior striker in that fight. and Chaos Williams is a far better striker than Seung Kenan is. Kenan, in his last outing, we saw him actually land a really clean shot on Ian Gary that would have put a lot of people out. I mean, you got to tip your hat to Ian Gary for walking through that shot and recovering from it. But after that one, well, we won't call it a lucky shot, but after that one prayer of a left hook or whatever that Seung Kenan landed, it was all downhill from there. Ian Gary just mauled him. Seung Kenan, I cannot see him having the striking offense to keep up with Bedoya. Peruvian MMA is up right now. I'm liking what we're seeing out of guys coming from that region in South America. They're showing up to the UFC and they're showing out. So I think Bedoya gets a decision win in this one, and a decisive one. I think Bedoya by a unanimous decision could be a good play. Next up is a middleweight fight between Chidi Njokuani and Michal Oleksiejczuk. Peep that pronunciation right there. That was sick. Chidi is this one's pretty much a pick'em. Chidi's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. Oleksiejczuk is 3-2 as well. These are 2 of the best KO artists in the middleweight division. Both these guys are really powerful strikers. Chidi is the more cleaner striker of the 2, and I'd say if this was like a Taekwondo fight where it's more about points than damage and whatnot, I would give Chidi the edge in this one. But I think Oleksiejczuk just has the better motor out of these 2. We've seen Chidi gas after a couple rounds, like in that fight versus Gregory Rodriguez. Looked great early on in the fight, was landing clean strikes. His knees are amazing, and he's always dangerous. But we saw him after the first round when he couldn't find a finish. He was kind of in no man's land and just ended up getting finished pretty easily by Rodriguez. Oleksiejczuk, he's a guy who goes in there and he's really only wins by KO. He's coming off of a loss to a really good grappler in Caio Bahaio, but Chidi does not pose the same threat in the grappling exchanges. So I think Oleksiejczuk finds a KO in this one. I think if he finds himself on top of Chidi, ground and pounding on him, then I think this one's going to be over real quick. Next up is a bantamweight fight between Toshiomi Kazama and Garrett Armfield. Don't know too much about these guys. Kazama lost his debut to Rinya Nakamura, and I think that in the road to the UFC finals or whatever that is. He's taking on Garrett Armfield, who also is 0-1 in the UFC, but his loss was up at 145 to David Onama. Onama being a guy who is a serious player in the 145 division, so he's going to be going back down to bantamweight, I think, which is much more appropriate for him. Just seeing how Kazama got laid out by Nakamura, put out cold, I'm going to take Armfield in this one. I don't know if he finds a finish. I think it's more likely he'll find a decision, but Armfield, I see getting the nod in this one. Next up is a heavyweight fight between Waldo Acosta-Cortes and Lukasz Brzeski. Cortez is the big favorite in this one, coming in at -270. He's 3-1 in the UFC. Lukasz Brzeski is the 2-1 underdog, and he's still looking for his first win in the UFC. Brzeski's a guy who actually has a pretty decent gas tank. Had a good close fight between him and Martin Budai, where he was landing a lot. He has really good leg kicks, good motor. He's just a bit smaller for the division. But he's taking on a guy who, Waldo Acosta-Cortes, despite being 3-1 and having won 3 in a row before his most recent loss, he really has not shown much. I was expecting to see more out of this guy after he got his win in the Contender Series, and he had all the opportunity to against Chase Sherman and Jared Vanderaa, and really just hasn't shown much of a finishing ability. He's got a lot of power, just looking at him, and he throws hard, but he just hasn't really put it all together yet. I think Brzeski could be a cheeky underdog play here to win this one by decision. So I'm going with Brzeski. I think he can just outland Cortes and frustrate him. We have a couple more heavyweights coming up. It is Junior Tafa taking on Parker Porter. And if you're having deja vu hearing those names, you're not alone, because I also was confused by this. And that is because Junior Tafa's older brother, Justin Tafa, who's been in the UFC for a bit now, just KO'd Parker Porter not too long ago. Tafa is the minus 150 favorite, and I would have anticipated him being much more. He did lose to Muhammad Usman, despite wobbling Usman a lot. He just kind of got out-grappled in that fight. I want to say that was that wasn't the Ultimate Fighter finale, but yeah, we saw Usman just barely manage to make it 15 full minutes and just kind of out-clinched Junior Tafa. I don't think Parker Porter will be able to survive on the feet as long, though. Junior Tafa, this is only his 6th or 7th pro MMA fight, so I'm guessing he's only getting better. Tafa's younger, 26, so he's probably constantly improving. I think he finds a first-round KO in this one. This line seems a little trappy because I think a lot of people would see Parker Porter and want to bet against him, but I think Porter is actually a bit better than people give him credit for. It's just the athleticism and power difference in this one is going to be too much, especially in the heavyweight division, where that's kind of half the battle. That fight is kicking off our main event, and the next fight in the main event is going to be a big fight in the strawweight division between Erin Blanchfield and Taila Santos. Blanchfield is undefeated in the UFC, 5-0, and is the minus 140 favorite. Taila is 4-1, with her lone loss being to Valentina in a title shot, and she's the plus 120 underdog. This fight has a huge connotations for who's going to fight for the belt next, obviously assuming that when you don't include the Valentina rematch with Alexa Grasso. Taila had a really close fight with Valentina where she was able to manage to get on top for a good amount of that fight and put a lot of damage on Valentina, more than we had seen up to that point. But she ended up just getting outworked in the end there. And then we have Erin Blanchfield on the other side, who's a brilliant grappler, but we haven't really seen her up against a fighter, an elite level fighter. She obviously dismantled Jessica Andrade, but it feels like everyone in women's MMA is taking care of Jessica Andrade pretty easily as of late. So this one's a really tough one to predict. I think the stand-up edge is going to go to Taila. She's just taller, longer, and we've seen her have more consistent success on the feet than Blanchfield. And Taila did have a lot of success against someone who I guess you could compare to Blanchfield in Gillian Robertson, just being a phenomenal jiu-jitsu fighter. And she showed great submission defense in that fight versus Gillian. Got caught into a couple precarious positions and fought her way out of them. This one just feels like a little bit too much, too quick for Erin Blanchfield, so I'm taking Taila by decision in this one. Blanchfield's only 25 or 26, I want to say, if not younger. So she definitely has all the time in the world to keep making a run at a title shot. I just think this is not a very advantageous matchup for her to do that. Next up is a bantamweight fight between Rinya Nakamura and Fernie Garcia. Nakamura is a huge favorite in this one. He's coming off of a KO win over Toshiomi, fighter who I mentioned a bit earlier, or Toshiomi Kazama. I just completely combined his first and last name. He's going to be taking on Fernie Garcia, a guy who's 2-1 in the UFC. But yeah, Nakamura, this just feels like a fight where the UFC is really trying to prop up Nakamura. He's got a really cool backstory. He was an Olympic hopeful, so his wrestling's on point. Retired early at 25 to focus solely on MMA. And it turns out his father was a pioneer for the sport of MMA in Japan. Supposedly, people say organizations like Pride never really would have existed without this guy's grandpa. So, you know that this game's in his blood. Nakamura is a very explosive athlete who's had a few flash KOs where he's putting guys out cold. So you know he's just powerful, and he's got a variety of striking he uses. We haven't seen him lean on his wrestling as much, but I could anticipate him doing so in this fight versus Fernie Garcia. There's not much value in the money line, being minus 700, and just with the guy only having 7 pro fights, that's just, I'd be very careful just throwing him into a parlay and forgetting about it. But I see Rinya giving Fernie Garcia his first finish loss in this one. He's just super explosive, and Garcia's a bit one-dimensional. Next up is a featherweight fight between Alex Caceres and Giga Chikadze. Caceres is 4-1 in his last 5. He's a guy who's stuck around the UFC for so long, veteran of the game, and he's had a lot of success as of late. Despite that, he is the 2-1 underdog, with Giga being a minus 230 favorite. Giga is also 4-1 in his last 5 fights, but we haven't seen him in the octagon for over a year and a half, since January of 22, because he went 5 rounds with Calvin Kattar and got a next level whooping from Kattar. He was looking like a serious problem at 145 up until that fight. He was on a 3-fight KO streak against guys like Edson Barbosa and Cub Swanson. We know Giga's coming in with great striking, probably the best kicks in the division, just about. I mean, him or Yair Rodriguez. But it's kind of hard to rely on kicking. We've seen, I mean, from Yair Rodriguez as well, he's, has tried relying on sort of spinning kicks and flashy stuff like that, and it's kind of tough to have sustained success with that. Despite that, yes, Caceres is a more well-rounded guy here, and I could see him taking Giga's back and subbing him that way, but Giga's shown pretty good submission defense in the past. He's only been submitted twice. I think Giga bounces back from his brutal loss to Calvin Kattar and gets himself on track versus Alex Caceres. Probably by decision in this one. I think he's going to be a bit more hesitant to conserve his gas tank, and just really going to be looking to get back in the win column rather than going all out for a finish if he does end up wobbling Caceres. So Giga by decision is going to be the pick there. Our co-main event, which doesn't feel like much of a co-main event, is a light heavyweight fight between Anthony Smith and Ryan Spann. This is the rematch of their 2021 fight where Anthony Smith ended up getting a submission in that one. These guys did not like each other. I'm assuming they still do not like each other. Lot of shit talking after Smith got this finish. A lot of chirping going into that one that I think boiled over. And Anthony Smith pretty much dominated that fight. He landed big counters. And once he got on Spann's back, it was over. But Anthony Smith is pretty firmly on my do not bet list, especially after that performance against Johnny Walker. I mean, we saw him really struggle against the size of Johnny Walker. Ryan Spann is not quite as big, but he's still definitely big and bigger than Anthony Smith. I really just was concerned by Anthony Smith's performance. Him being a smaller guy, you would also expect him to have a bigger gas tank and try and outwork his opponent, but we didn't even see that in his last fight. We saw him gas out and just didn't have much of an answer at all for Johnny Walker. Got pretty much dominated from bell to bell. So I think Spann's got the power edge in this one. I mean, I was hoping for Spann to take a bigger leap after that Dominic Reyes KO. Took a small step back against Nikita Krylov, but Krylov is one of the better fighters at 205, so I guess that's excusable. I think Spann gets a KO in this one. Anthony Smith, I just kind of have concerns about his athleticism. He doesn't look as explosive as he once was. And he's definitely a gamer. I mean, you hear him talk about the sport, and you know that he's like super cerebral about the fight, but I think that can really only get you so far when you're fighting these killers at 205, where one shot can change everything. So I think Ryan Spann, I'm going to give him the edge in this one. I think he finds a KO. And our main event is, of course, Max Holloway taking on the Korean Zombie. Holloway is minus 750 last I checked. Probably could be an even more heavily favorite by now. Not much to really break down in this one. I mean, Holloway is a guy who's in the prime of his career, 31 years old. It's really rare that you find a guy with as much experience as Holloway also be in their prime athletic years. He's got so many fights under his belt, and yes, he's got a lot of cage time, and people are going to would try and say that, you know, spending that much time in the cage just can't be that good for like your chin and just for your body in general, but we haven't seen that Holloway really be affected by that. The Korean Zombie is, you know, I think people forget how good he really once was. He took 2 years off of some of his best years in his heyday after fighting for the belt, I believe, and he took 2 years to serve in the military because Korea has mandatory military service. But yeah, he took 2 years off in the prime of his career, and I think that's just something he's been struggling to come back from. That's just a really hard thing for anyone to do. 2 years off of training every day, that just puts you that much further behind the other guys who didn't take that time off. And he really just took a career-altering beating against Volkanovski in his most recent fight. Got battered over, I think, 4 rounds before Herb Dean stopped it out of pity, basically. I think Holloway's going to hit him a lot. Holloway doesn't have the power of Volkanovski, but we see him put it on guys, and I just don't see the Zombie having much of an answer. I think Holloway finds a finish in this one. He's gonna be fighting inspired. He was talking in the press conferences. He's got all of Hawaii on his shoulders in this one, more so, of course, than before, just given the whole situation happening in his hometown. He's going to be inspired. He's going to come out and look to make a statement. And he knows that another title shot is within his grasp as well, with a decisive win here. So Holloway by KO is going to be the pick in that one. And with that is the breakdown. Good luck to all who will be waking up for the fights like myself. Hopefully won't pass out after the first one. If there is a boring fight within the first 3 fights, I will be out like a light. So hoping that this one excites, and hoping you all have a great weekend. Like and comment, subscribe and whatnot. And we'll see you on the next one. Peace.